Some doors should never be opened. Elevators are meant to be simple, a modern convenience that whisks you from one floor to another. But sometimes they become something else entirely. Sometimes they're a trap. It was 3:47 a.m., and I was leaving work, exhausted to my core. My hospital shift had stretched far beyond its usual 12 hours, and my body ached as if it had been wrung dry. I worked in the ER, where everything was chaos and nothing could ever prepare you for what walked or was dragged through the door. Tonight had been brutal. An overdose that ended with a grieving mother's screams, a motorcycle accident that left a man's face unrecognizable, and a child we couldn't save. I could still hear the monitor's flat line echoing in my ears as I shuffled into the hospital's parking structure. It was the kind of sound that sticks with you, creeping into your dreams. The structure was eerily quiet. The sound of my footsteps bounced off the concrete, accompanied only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I parked on the 7th floor, but the thought of climbing 7 flights of stairs after today made my legs protest. When I reached the elevator, my gut clenched. It wasn't anything obvious, just a feeling. The steel doors stood there like an open mouth, waiting. The air felt heavier as I pressed the UP button. The elevator arrived with a ding, its doors sliding open to reveal a dimly lit interior. I stepped inside, ignoring the faint smell of oil and something else I couldn't place. I pressed 7, leaning against the wall as the doors closed. The hum of the motor and the faint, warbled music from the speaker overhead filled the space. Then came the first jolt. It wasn't violent, just a slight shudder, as if the elevator was unsure of itself. I glanced at the floor indicator. The glowing 2 inches blinked twice, then disappeared. The elevator stopped abruptly. I waited, expecting the doors to open. They didn't. I hit the 7 inches button again. Nothing happened. The air inside seemed to grow colder. I glanced at the emergency button, considering pressing it. But before I could, a sound stopped me. It was faint at first. A soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to come from above, but the more I listened, the more it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. The tapping stopped. Before I could react, the elevator plummeted. The speed was impossible, far faster than any elevator should move. My stomach lurched into my throat as I gripped the railing, bracing myself for an impact that never came. The digital floor indicator flashed wildly, the numbers cycling backward before settling on a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like an inverted cross, but it flickered so quickly I couldn't be sure. When the elevator stopped, it wasn't with the bone-crushing crash I feared. It simply halted. The doors opened to reveal a long, narrow hallway. The air was damp and cold, carrying a stench of rot so strong it made my stomach churn. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, its walls made of something dark and wet. I stepped out, my shoes sticking slightly to the floor. The whispers began immediately, soft at first, growing louder with each step I took. They were overlapping, chaotic, and filled with words I couldn't fully understand. As I moved further in, the walls pulsed faintly, as though alive. My flashlight revealed scratches gouged into the surface, names, symbols, and what looked like tally marks. I stumbled upon a shoe lying in the middle of the floor, a child's shoe. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it, a pink sneaker with a cartoon princess decal. I had seen it earlier tonight, on the feet of the child we lost in the ER. I looked up, and for a split second, I saw her at the end of the hallway. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, and her lips moved silently, as though whispering something I couldn't hear. When I blinked, she was gone. The whispers turned into moans, low and guttural. The light from my phone barely cut through the darkness now, but I could see shapes moving just beyond its glow. They were human-like but distorted, bodies twisted and broken, their limbs bent at unnatural angles. One of them crawled toward me on all fours, its head tilting unnaturally as it grinned. Its teeth were jagged, its eyes black pits that seemed to drink the light. I turned and ran. The hallway seemed endless, but finally, I saw it. The elevator I had stepped out of. Its doors were still open, glowing faintly like a beacon. I dove inside, slamming my fist against the closed door button. The figures reached the threshold, just as the doors slid shut. I was safe. Or so I thought. The elevator began to move again, but instead of going up, it went sideways. The walls creaked and groaned as though they were under immense pressure. The lights flickered, and in the brief flashes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was my reflection, but it wasn't me. It stared back at me with a grin that stretched impossibly wide, its eyes bleeding black ichor. "You shouldn't have left," it whispered. The elevator stopped again, the doors opening to reveal another nightmare. This time it was a room filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a version of me. Some crying, some screaming, some lifeless on the floor. One of them moved closer to the glass, pressing its hand against the surface. "You can't leave," it said. No matter how many buttons I pressed, the elevator wouldn't return to the parking structure. It stopped at floor after floor, each one worse than the last. A hospital ward filled with screaming patients, a forest of hanging bodies, their eyes wide open, a room with no floor, just an endless abyss. Every time the doors closed, the reflection grew closer. When the elevator stopped again, it was silent. The door slid open, and I saw the parking garage. I stepped out cautiously, my heart pounding. My car was where I left it, untouched. But when I turned back, the elevator was gone. The wall was solid concrete, as though it had never been there. Did this story send shivers down your spine? Subscribe to Shadow Stories for more bone-chilling tales every week. Don't miss the next nightmare. We dare you to open the door.